One of the things that I teach people when I'm teaching personal evangelism classes is if we had one thing that we can think of that we would know assuredly that the Lord would have us to do, that would be to share our faith with others. We read the parable of the 5-talent man, the 3-talent man, the 1-talent man. If it's boiled down to that, and there's one thing that I know absolutely for sure that the Lord would want all of us to be able to do, that would be to be able to share our faith with others. And this is really, really important to me, and I'm going to do for you what I teach people to do in personal evangelism classes, is I'm going to tell you my story. And that's really important when you're going to become evangelistic, when you're going to start being intentional as a congregation and as individuals, that you develop a method, a process. I was a process improvement manager for Tyson Foods, Lean Six Sigma, all that mess. Some of you know what that means. And so I look at evangelism a little bit differently than a lot of the people that I've been studying. I've been studying local evangelism for almost 25 years. From some men and learned quite a bit from some ladies in the Brotherhood about how to be effective in local evangelism. I'm going to mention a few of those things when we get to that in the lesson. But as I said, one of the things that I think is important if you're going to be effective at reaching people is to be able to empathize with them. And in order to be able to empathize with them, you have to be able to share your story so you can relate to them and you could possibly help somebody that's been through some of the same things that you've been through. By the time my parents started having kids, they were completely non-practicing Catholics. I had zero interaction with the Lord's church until I was 16 years old. I was standing with one of my best friends. He and I were on the basketball team together, and my brother was standing here, and Ricky was standing next to Teresa. Teresa's a member of the church. Ricky and I and my brother are not, and Teresa's ex-boyfriend comes up, also a member of the church. First interaction with the church here, folks. And her ex-boyfriend comes up to Ricky and says, "You know you're going to hell because you're not a member of the Lord's church." That was 1979. My brother still thinks about the Lord's church because of that interaction, even though I've been a preacher of the gospel for 20-something years. Our words have impact, and sometimes they have eternal impact. I've been fighting against that with my brother and my family for the last 32 years, trying to teach my family the gospel of Christ. That was my junior year. In my senior year, I dated a girl that was in the Church of Christ. Went to services with her for about a year. Not a single person asked me to have a Bible study. Went to college at Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, Arkansas, played basketball for them. Started dating a girl. She was a member of the church. Went to church with her in her hometown. Went to church with her because she had spent the last year at Harding and Searcy. Went to church both places with her. Multiple times over a period of about a year and a half, nobody asked me for a Bible study. Got out of college, went to work for Tyson Foods in Neosho, Missouri. Started dating a girl. Guess what? Member of the church. Went to church with her for about 6 months there in Missouri. Not a single person asked me for a Bible study. Folks, it ought not to be so. That should never happen to anybody. And this is one of the reasons why I'm particularly passionate about local evangelism. As Clay said, I've done my share of world evangelism. I could go the rest of my life and never go another place, and have done and been blessed to have been many different places. And for the last 15 years or so, I've really been concentrating on how to help congregations become more effective locally. You know, global evangelism is a whole lot easier than local evangelism, because in a lot of ways, what we as individuals do is we contribute to that by contributing money, right? And that's not that difficult to do if you have it. Local evangelism is a totally different animal, because you have something at stake when you're talking to your family or your friends or your coworkers or your neighbors, somebody you meet at the market, somebody you meet, any of these places that we go to. You have something at stake, and you can lose something. You can lose relationships with people if that goes wrong. I didn't have a person in the Church of Christ offer to study the Bible with me until I met Maria. And Maria's my wife. The first interaction was when I was 16 years old, and when I started dating Maria, I was 27 years old. 11 years that I had had some interaction with during that period of time with members of the Lord's church, and never once had anybody asked me to have a Bible study. I pray that's not the case here. I pray that's not the case anywhere anymore in the Lord's church. I hope that that's something that we can learn from and that we can be intentional. That's what my talk tonight is about. It's about being intentional, about benevolence and evangelism. I believe they go hand in hand. I want you to turn in your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 2, because this is the passage when I started searching. It's not on a slide, but I'm going to read it for you. You know, when I got into high school and college, all my friends went to church. I went to church with them wherever they invited me to go. I enjoyed going to church. This period of time where I've been having these interactions with people in the church, it wasn't because I wasn't disinterested. It's just because nobody asked me to. I'd go to this place and they'd tell me one thing. I'd go to that place, they'd tell me another. It was very confusing to me. And one of the things that really got me was this passage in Ephesians chapter 2. It's over the last 30 years, it's probably one of the most quoted from people that I'm studying the Bible with to try to show me that what I'm teaching them maybe isn't quite right. And that's a passage that you're probably very, very familiar with from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. Now that's where most people, when you're studying the Bible with them, want to stop reading, isn't it? Because what that teaches you, if you just look at that in that context, is that the only thing involved in our salvation is God's grace and our faith. And Paul goes on to say, not of works, lest any man should boast. So we know that there's some kind of works being taught here that Paul says are not contributing to your salvation. And I would suggest to you that those are works of merit, or works that where we feel like that we've accomplished something great, and perhaps we put God in a position where He owes us something, and that would be completely false. But what happens when people read Ephesians 2, 8, 9, they are stopping a little bit short. And to complete the thought that Paul had via inspiration, you have to also include with that verse 10. For we, Christians, are His, God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Now, wait a minute. We just got through reading the verse before that works has nothing to do with it. And then in the next verse, we see that God created some works, placed them out in front of us beforehand so that we would walk in them, so that we would see these opportunities and we would do something about it. Folks, if there's any topic that God would want you and I to do something about, if He's going to have anything to do with it, a good work, put it beforehand, surely the relationships that we develop, the people that we meet, one of the things He would be talking about there is when somebody comes into your life, there's probably a purpose for it, and that purpose is probably so that you can share your faith with them. If it's not that, then what is it? There are some things, according to this passage, that we must do, not because we think that we're earning anything, but because God has put it out there in front of us. He's given us this opportunity. He's helped us to meet this person and be placed in that person's life when they have a difficulty. We're going to talk about one of those here in a minute. And we need to, as faithful Christians, we need to step through those doors, and we need to walk that path and take care of those things that God has prepared beforehand so that we can help people understand who Jesus Christ is and what He has made available for all men. Let's go ahead and go on. There we go. In order for us to be successful in local evangelism, I believe that most congregations need a paradigm shift. And the reason why I say that is, before I moved to Huntsville, Alabama, I was at West Huntsville for a little while, working in a food plant again, like I did when I got out of college before the position opened up over at Chase Park. And I know that before I even read the job description for the position, I didn't even know there was such a thing as an evangelism minister. I've been in the church by that time, 25 years. I'd never even heard of it before. And I read this job description to my wife, Maria, and I said, look at this. I just saw this. And this is here in Huntsville. And she read it, and my wife's a professional technical writer by education. And she goes, that was written for you. And I said, that's what I thought. When I said this, I didn't even know there was such a thing. I've always been the pulpit preacher. Never been an evangelism minister. I've been an evangelist, but not an evangelism minister. And so the reason I bring that up is because most places that I've been have been very small congregations, and the pulpit minister was the evangelism minister, and he was a youth minister, and he was every other minister too. And most of the places we were at, except for when we were overseas as missionaries, it was my wife and I that were doing almost all of the work in the congregation. And there was a mindset in congregations that said it's the minister's job. If we had elders, it's the elder's job. If there were deacons, it's the deacon's job. And you would develop a mindset sometimes in congregations where people, members in the congregation, would think, well, that's just somebody else's job. What we're talking about here is a paradigm shift for everybody in the church to understand that evangelism is everybody's job. Not everybody is going to be doing the same thing, but everybody needs to be doing something, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. Let's see if, yeah, there we go. What do you think is the single most important element a congregation needs to be effective in local evangelism? What do you think that might be? From my experience, my study, 20-something years at looking at this, I had a man tell me this about 15 years ago when I was searching this out, and I looked at it and looked at successful congregations, successful ministers, and I found what he said was absolutely true, and that's this. The single most important thing is the eldership's unconditional support for and participation in local evangelism. Without that, a congregation is not going to be as effective as they possibly can be in their location. You have to have an eldership that's completely sold out. They have to, when they're speaking or when they're doing announcements or when they're teaching a class, they need to be talking about the evangelistic efforts. They need to be sharing with you what's going on in the congregation. Your evangelism minister needs to do that. Ben needs to do that. Everybody needs to be talking about evangelism, and it has to be driven first and foremost by the elders. Why? Because people won't go where leaders won't lead. And if they're not leading in evangelism, the congregation is not going to participate in evangelism. It's not going to happen. I'm not saying that if you're not active here, that's the reason why. There could be lots of reasons. And you may very well be extremely active. I don't know. First time I've been here. But most of the places I've been haven't been. And this is a big reason why. Is because of this mindset. We have to have a paradigm shift. We have to understand that when we come up out of the waters of baptism, one of the things we signed on to by becoming a disciple of Christ is to make disciples of Christ, is to help people learn about Jesus by presenting the gospel to them. Anybody here know who this is? Is Anderson here? This is Anderson's dad, by the way. Anderson's dad, Barry, is one of our elders. And Anderson's mom and dad, Barry and Lee, studied with this lady, Debbie Limley. Took about 3 months of studying with her. She decided she wanted to put on Christ in baptism. They come to the building, and Barry comes up to me, and you know what he says? I don't think I would embarrass Barry by telling you this. You know what he said? He comes up to me, he goes, you know what, Pat? I need for you to baptize Debbie. You know what I told him? Not a chance in the world. Not a chance in the world that I'm going to baptize this lady. Because you know what? When an elder and his wife study with and bring a person to a decision point about Christ, and that decision is to put Christ on in baptism, the elder needs to do it. That is local congregational development gold. It doesn't get any better than that. When you have an elder who's showing and leading by example of how this works, it can be done. It doesn't have to be a minister. Anybody can do this, and then when you get to that point and somebody says, yes, let's do that. Let's involve our elders. Let's involve people that aren't the ministers. We're going to talk about that some if we don't run out of time. By the way, Clay mentioned I've spent quite a bit of time in India. If I stopped before about 2 or 3 hours in India, they'd be offended. How about y'all? Is that okay? Short of 2 or 3 hours? All right. So here's one example of this. Here's another example. Some of you might know this guy. He's another one of our elders. His name's Curtis Hill. Same thing. When you have men in the congregation who are involved in evangelism and they bring a person to a decision point and that decision is made to put on Christ, they must be involved in this. Unless there's some physical reason why they can't, the congregation seeing that either live or seeing it, doing a video or pictures of it and putting it up on the slides and seeing how involved and how engaged the eldership is in evangelism, that's a major driver to get other people to buy in. I was in food production management for a number of years, and I can guarantee you that if you are not willing to go somewhere, you will not lead people where you want them to go. And that's one of the things I greatly appreciate about our elders. The next important element a congregation needs to be effective in local evangelism is someone to drive the effort. You have to have somebody who just absolutely lives and breathes evangelism. Now, I would suggest to you that should be all of us. But there's got to be somebody who's responsible, because if everybody's responsible for the efforts, nobody's responsible, right? And so there's got to be somebody, one person in a congregation. Doesn't have to be a minister, doesn't have to be the minister. It could be just about anybody in a congregation that has a passion for it. In fact, I'm going to share a picture of one of those guys right here. This is the only slide I have from the mission field, because I'm talking mainly about local evangelism. But guess what? When you're in the mission field, the evangelism is local for them, right? Because they're sharing the gospel with their neighbors and their families, right? This guy's name is Ruel Reyes. When I moved to Saipan with my family in 2008, he was already visiting a class that we called New Converts and Searchers class. Studied the Bible with him every Thursday night, and one Thursday night I was taking Ruel and Dante and Lito home back to where they were staying in a housing complex there on Saipan, and Ruel decided he wanted to be baptized into Christ. It was about a little bit after midnight. We went over to the Pacific Ocean, baptized him into Christ. That was Thursday. On Sunday, he came to church, took the Lord's Supper for the first time, came to the men's business meeting, told everybody there, the men in the business meeting, I want to learn how to teach the gospel to my family in the Philippines, and Pat, I want to go with you the next time you go to Tinian, which was going to be 2 Sundays from then, and I want to teach the Bible class 2 Sundays. 3 days after he was baptized, he and I spent 2 weeks preparing a lesson for him to teach on Tinian. By the way, this picture here is that day, right? This is the first service we had in this building, a rented building that I found on Tinian. The very first service that we know of, except for maybe in World War II, because when I was raising funds to go to Saipan and Tinian, I met some men that were there, that were in the church, that were on Navy vessels during World War II. There might have been services there, but this is the first service that we knew of that had ever been held on the island of Tinian of the Lord's Church. And Ruel, a Christian who'd been a Christian for 2.5 weeks, spent 2 weeks studying for this lesson, and we were working with a lady named Elma, who was a lady that rented the cars on island, rented them on Tinian, rented them on Saipan. I called her the week before we went and said, we're going to be over there on island if you're going to be there. We'd love for you to come to services. She had told me she loved to study the Bible, and I said, let's study the Bible. We're going to be over there. We can study the Bible. She said she'd be there. Time came for Bible class. Nobody was there. Not even when we went door knocking. Not a single person showed up. So you know who was there? It was Ruel and Pat. And it's time for Bible class. And I said, Ruel, I'm really sorry about this. I don't want you to get discouraged. I'm really sorry that Elma or nobody else showed up. If you want me to, I'll teach the Bible class. He said, no, Brother Pat. He said, I prepared this lesson. I'm going to present this lesson. I said, I appreciate that, brother. So I sat down. He started talking. About 20 minutes later, I heard the tires on the crushed coral driveway, and I turn around. Here comes Elma. And so she comes in and she sits down. Before she sits down, I told Ruel, I said, that's Elma. When she comes in, start over from the beginning. He'd already taught 20 minutes of the class, right? So the very first time he ever teaches a Bible class, he's going to teach it 1.5 times, right? So he starts over from the beginning, and he starts teaching the class again. And then afterwards, when it's time for services, what you see here is him reading some comments before the Lord's Supper. Very first time on this island, here's a lady who's never heard the gospel in its entirety and its truth. And here you have a Christian that's been a Christian for 2.5 weeks, taught the Bible class, doing the Lord's Supper, saying prayers. It was the single most spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. and it was 2 people and me. It wasn't a huge crowd. It was absolutely the greatest event. And that may not mean a whole lot to you, but boy, it does to me. And you know what, Ruel? He didn't stop for figuring out and putting a lesson together with me for this class period. He could only go back to his family every 2.5 years. And he was coming up about a year from here to go back to his family. And when he went back, he said, I am going to teach the gospel to all of my family and my village. You know how many islands there are in the Philippines? And he lives on one of these small ones. You know how many there are? 8,000. And he lives on one of the little ones. No church. Never even heard of the church before he came to Saipan. And he went, and he taught his entire family, in-laws, his parents, his wife, his brothers, his sister. And when he left after that 2 months, there was a Church of Christ in his village on his island. That's who you're looking for. You're looking for that as a prospect to share the gospel with, but you're also looking for that kind of heart. You're looking for a spirit like Caleb had. Remember, Caleb had a different spirit, right? Joshua and Caleb had a different spirit. That's what you want. You want somebody who is so eaten up. They're so excited about being a Christian. You can't stop them. It's like the fire in the bones, right? You can't stop them from talking about Jesus Christ. That's Ruel. He's still a faithful Christian on the island of Saipan. Still only gets to see his family every 2.5 years. It's terrible. I hope I never forget Ruel. I hope I never forget what I learned from Ruel. The final element is the support of the entire congregation. The aspirational goal for every congregation is for every Christian to be enthusiastically involved in local evangelism. That's an aspirational goal. And having aspirational goals is biblical. Because God the Father has an aspirational goal which will not be met. Think about that for a second. The most powerful being in the universe has an aspirational goal that he will not receive, but we are charged with helping him try to receive and achieve that goal. You know what it is? For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. You hear people talking about what is God's will for you in your life. What's God's will for you, this person in their life? I tell you what God's will is. He wants them to be saved. And He wants them to come to the knowledge of the truth. And He wants them to spend eternity with Him forever. And He's not going to get it. Because Jesus says there's a broad way and a narrow way. Right? And there's a whole lot of folks going down the broad way. And those are the folks that we need to try to reach and help them understand the gospel. So after we have the eldership behind it, the driver, whoever that may be, in place, the congregations behind it, they're supporting it, how do we get our local evangelistic efforts jump-started? How do we do that? What does it look like in order to do that? What's some practical thing, one practical thing perhaps that we can do? We can use our everyday conversations and inject them with the most effective words of a spiritual nature. And when we do that, it could be something as simple as, what a beautiful day the Lord's blessed us with. It doesn't have to be any more than that. And you know why that's important? Because when you say that to the lady at the bank, I did it yesterday at the bank, and guess what? The lady responded in kind with some interest, and guess what? She's a member of the church. I didn't know that. But you know what? Sometimes when you do that, they're not a member of the church. And sometimes when they respond with any interest whatsoever, any spark of interest whatsoever, it is our responsibility to take that spark and fan it into a flame and get them interested in spiritual matters. When any interest at all is shown, we use this is my opinion. I'm going to tell you about 2 passages that say it, but it's my opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right. But in my experience, this has been the 3 most powerful words in our evangelistic toolbox. Come and see. Jesus said it to 2 disciples in John 1:39, and then a few verses later when Nathanael said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip says, come and see. You know why this is important, especially coming from someone like me? What I told you earlier about my experience is because most of the people that I study with and most of the people that I went to college with and went to high school with and worked with at Tyson Foods and other places, whatever experience they've had with the church was very similar to mine. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? And they've got a bias. And they've got it in their head that this is not some place that I want to be. And so if they bring that up when they're talking to me, this is what I say. You know what I say? I say, come and see. You know what? I say after I follow that up, and then I say this. You've probably, because I was where you are now, I've heard a lot of things, a lot of bad things. And I didn't know what to think either. Come and see. And when you come and see, if Chase Park or Plainview is the way you were told, and the reason you're shying away, tell me. Because if somebody's acting in a way that's pushing people away from Christ, you know what? We need to stop it. We need to stop doing that. Whatever it is that's causing people to be repelled from Christ rather than attracted to Christ, as long as it's in harmony with the Scripture, let's do it. Let's bring people into Christ and into His church. These have been very effective and very easy to remember, right? So if somebody shows any interest at all, come see, come check us. It's another way of saying, come check us out, man. We got these great Bible classes. We got a great teen group here. You know, they may have, it may be a teen, it may be one of your classmates. By the way, you guys got a good girls basketball team. I watched them play 3 games at the end of the year this year. Woo! I've been watching girls and boys basketball for 40-something years. I've never seen anything like that. I'm not lying either. And by the way, while I was watching them, right after their game, I was watching Buckhorn too, because that's where most of our kids go, is that at Buckhorn. So between the two of them, it was a pretty good year, right? And for your girls, pretty good 7 years, isn't it? Yeah, anyway, it's kind of a side note. Come and see. Let's let people see that we're not the way some people say that we are. One of my very best friends in college, Rod Ray, I went to go tell his mom and dad, Rod Sr. and Aletha, that I was engaged to Maria, and they hadn't met Maria. And when I told them that we were getting married at the Bella Vista Church of Christ in Bella Vista, Arkansas, Miss Aletha, she hung her head and started shaking her head. She'd heard all those things. Come and see. And let me know if it's the way you've been told or if it's what you've experienced in the past. And let's change it. Let's make it where it's not that way. One of the things we do at Chase Park, and I think it was Gary told me that perhaps you're going to have Rob Whitaker up here in a little while. We at Chase Park, we call it the Barnabas Project, but what we're doing here is one of the things that's really important in my mind locally for local evangelism is not just to have the driver and to have support from the whole congregation, but to have a small group of people in the congregation who really do live and breathe evangelism, who want to learn how to have Bible studies, want to learn how to effectively invite people to services. And in this case, this is one of the groups of the ones that meet at Chase Park. They also meet together once every other week to send compassion cards, which is what Rob will talk to you about. People who are in need, people who are sick, people in the hospital, people who have visited services. And so we have 2 groups that meet every month to do those cards and to encourage people with the cards. Receiving a card can be extremely powerful evangelistically, and it's something that is very easy to do and is something that I encourage. You guys probably already do it, but I encourage you to do even more of it if you can. I wanted to show you some pictures. I already showed you Curtis and Barry baptizing the ladies that they studied with. This is Jared, and he's baptizing his daughter. The reason why I'm showing you this is they weren't even at services this day. You know where they were? They were over. This was right after the tornadoes hit in Mississippi. He was over in his hometown, Fulton, Mississippi, with his mom over there. The church, one of the churches over there had been partially damaged. He was over there. But while they were there, they weren't able to go to services, so they live streamed the services from Chase Park. And his daughter, after listening to Rusty speak about baptism that morning, decided after that, she virtually, I guess you would say, responded to the gospel, and they drove home, and that afternoon her daddy baptized her into Christ. Doesn't have to be a minister. Cody and Kirsten were dating. Cody's been in the church his whole life. Kirsten hasn't been. Before they got serious, before they got married, he studied the Bible with her for about 3 months. And then he was privileged, I didn't have a picture of it, but he was privileged to baptize her into Christ. She's now not only his sister, she's his wife, and she had baby Alina 1 week before my daughter Sarah had Rilla. So all of that's happened within the last 2 years with people who are not the ministers of the church sharing the gospel and bringing people to a decision point about Christ. Some of you may know this gentleman. This is John Denny. He was one of our elders, and he was the evangelism minister at Chase Park for 20-something years. He is neither one of those now, but he's still very, very active in evangelism. This fella, Jordan, showed up at services one day just out of the blue. We started a Bible study with him. I was over visiting Sarah before she had her baby. They finished the Bible study, and John, not a minister anymore, not an elder anymore, but involved in evangelism, and he baptized Jordan into Christ while I was out of town. This is a man, some of you may have met him. He has a business here in North Alabama. His name's Pablo Luck. He moved here from Brazil 4 years ago, and drove down Winchester Road. He belonged to a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventists in Brazil, and he saw a sign that said Church of Christ, knew like 6 English words. He came to church that Sunday. We started studying with him on Monday. He was baptized 3 months later, and he's been a faithful Christian at Chase Park ever since. A month after he was baptized into Christ, his wife and 2 daughters moved here from Brazil. The man that is with her, his name is Micah Matheny. Micah grew up in Brazil. He's fluent in Portuguese, and Micah helped with the study with Pablo, and then he also helped with the study with Tassiani. Now, when he was done with this study, what do you think happened? Do you think I baptized Tassiani with what I told you earlier? Not a chance. Why? Because this man, one of our deacons, was involved in the teaching and the conversion of her, leading her to Christ. Same thing as was with Barry. When you have somebody who's a member of the congregation that's willing to do this and willing to go through the work that it takes to bring somebody to Christ, they need to be involved, if at all possible, through the completion of it. So she also was baptized into Christ, but that wasn't the end of that story either, because about 6 months later, her mom and stepdad moved here from Brazil as well. And this picture is from one of my new converts classes that I teach. And what we do in this class, when Sylvia's here, they just got through having to move back to Brazil temporarily. But Tassiani knows some English. Sylvia knows no English, and so we used it like a class setting in the mission field where I would say it in English and then I would pause and then Pablo would translate it into Portuguese for Sylvia. And we have studied with her. We didn't get to finish the study with her, but Lord willing, we'll be able to finish it when they come back from Brazil. And Pablo wasn't even done with Tassiani or with Sylvia. This is him studying the Bible with his friend, also from Brazil, Diogo. And Diogo works with him in the construction industry. And the only reason I was there, why I took the picture, I was there just to assist if he had any questions that Pablo did not know the answer to. I did have my picture in this one for not because of me, but because of who's in it. And I think he and his family might have come up here when he was younger, either to Plainview or Meridianville. His name is Taylor Hughes. I don't know if you know Taylor, but Taylor about I guess about 3.5 years ago, I studied with him, and he was baptized into Christ. And then a couple of years ago, he started dating a girl named Alexia Sharp. And last year at Polishing the Pulpit, which is coming up in 3 weeks from today, last year on Sunday, he baptized Alexia into Christ. And so the new converts are involved in making disciples, and that's exactly what we need to have happen in our congregations. Now, this again is me. It's not because it's about me. It's because of the man that I'm studying with. This man, we studied the Bible with him for over a year. You know why it took so long? Number one, he had a lot of questions, a lot of denominational background and baggage that we had to work through. But during the period of time that we were studying with him, and I'll show you a picture in a little while of his cousin, who, by the way, over the last 3 years, she has, when we do Bible studies, we always eat, we always have a meal, and then we study the Bible. His cousin, over the last 2 years, has prepared 50-something meals in her home for us to have Bible studies with people who are interested in the gospel. And Joe was one of those that it took almost a year. And part of the reason why it took so long is during that time, which was right in the middle of COVID, 9 of his family members, including himself, got COVID, close enough family members that he was in quarantine, or his daughter was in quarantine, or his mother was in quarantine, and 2 of his grandparents passed away outside of the Lord during that time. If I've ever studied the Bible with anybody who had more things come up that could have kept them from finishing the study and obeying the gospel, it's this guy right here. And yet he finished it. And as you can see, he obeyed the gospel as well. But he wasn't done either. This is a picture down the other side of near Gurley on Hurricane Creek one night. The man right next to me, his name's Dustin. Dustin is related to Joe, the guy that I just showed you, and the shorter lady in front, her name is Jamie Miller. They're all related. And we'd been studying with Dustin, and that night he decided he couldn't wait any longer, couldn't even wait long enough to go to the church building. So we went down to Hurricane Creek on their property, and he was baptized into Christ. And his mom and stepdad were there to see it. They're not members of the church either. And by the way, we have Bible studies going with them as well. And that's a picture of Dustin being baptized in Hurricane Creek there. But they weren't done because Beverly, one of the ladies that's been hosting the Bible study, this is her aunt. And her aunt had interest in spiritual matters as well, and we conducted a Bible study with her, and then she was baptized into Christ. But they weren't done. This is 2 more of their cousins in Jamie's house, and we were studying the Bible with them at her dining room table. Now, not all Bible studies, you got to know this, not all Bible studies end up with somebody obeying the gospel, and this one didn't either. Same thing happened here. One of Joe's good friends studied the Bible with him several times. Sometimes our role, and we'll talk about that in a second as we close, our role is to present the gospel to people and bring them, if they will allow us to a decision point about Christ. And guess what? Sometimes they say no. And sometimes we just have to accept no as an answer, because today might not be the day. I shared the gospel with somebody in 1992, and I found out in 2012 that they were baptized in 1996. I never knew it. 20 years later, I found out that somebody I'd studied with was baptized into Christ. I wanted to share this, and I don't know whether this is going to play this or not. This is, I think, the last slide with a picture in it. It is a video, but if it goes too far, I'll just go back. Okay, no volume. Okay. We have a lady that moved, she and her daughter moved to Chase Park right at a year ago. She had moved her family to Georgia because her son was extremely ill. And she got on this multiple Facebook groups with ladies. This lady is one of them, whose son had a serious illness as well, similar illness. Well, Angela's son tragically passed away about a year and a half ago. And the whole time that Angela has known Carrie, she's been a faithful Christian. Her dad is an elder of the church. Her mom passed away with cancer a few years ago. Always been faithful, always sharing her faith. Shared her faith with these Facebook groups with all these ladies whose kids are sick. This lady has a problem, spiritual question. has never met Angela in person. And the one person she thinks about to ask for advice is Angela, because of her letting her light shine over all those years and showing her how important God was in her life and what Jesus had done for her and what the church meant to her. She has a question, so she calls Angela. You know what she says? She says, Angela, I'm not sure if I'm saved. Angela says, you want to be sure? Yes, I do. So they studied one of the studies that Rob will show you when he comes up here. It's called Doesn't Matter. It's one I share with people now too. And after about 6 weeks, she lives in Baytown, Texas. Never met the lady, studied with her over the internet. Her son had died a year ago. Her husband left her because of the sickness with the son. He just couldn't handle it. If there was ever anybody who could have left their faith because of their difficulties in their life and let that get them down and discourage them and keep them from sharing the faith, it would have been Angela. But instead of doing that, her faith remained strong, and when she was presented with the opportunity to share the gospel with someone, she took it. This lady is a Christian today because of that. Because of that relationship that she had, and because Angela was that outspoken to people about her faith. Focusing on local evangelism should be our focus. Why? Why should it be our focus? Because Jesus said so. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, he says to his disciples, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem. He says that first for a reason. In all Judea, Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. Jesus told the disciples, start at home. Don't just go to the end of the earth first. Start at home. And I would suggest to you that that pattern fits for us today as well. We need to reach out to those the closest to us, the ones we already know, the ones we come into contact with, the ones that we can reach the quickest and have the most influence over. The ultimate goal for local evangelistic efforts is to have as many people as possible involved in sharing the gospel with as many people as possible. And our goal at Chase Park is to bring as many people to a decision point about Christ as possible, and then let God do His part. I've been in a lot of congregations. I've sat at the feet of a lot of people in a lot of congregations, and I don't know how you are here, but a lot of congregations have goals set up based on how many people are baptized. Do we all rejoice when somebody is baptized into Christ? Of course we do. That's what we want, right? But that's not our business. Our business is teaching. Our business is to plant and water and to let God do His part. I, Paul, planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So that neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God gives the increase. 1 Corinthians 3, 6, and 7. You know why this is so important to me? As far as trying to develop congregations into becoming effective evangelistic teams, is because if you have it in your mind that it's your role and your goal to baptize somebody and it doesn't happen, you know what you do? You quit. You stop trying, and before you know it, you have a congregation like the first full-time congregation that I preached at full-time. I asked her, how long has it been since you'd had an evangelistic effort in your community? 15 years. People quit when they get discouraged, and they get discouraged when they think it's all on them. It's not all on us. It's not about us. It's between them and God. You share the gospel faithfully with somebody, they have to decide, is this for me or is it not? I hope and pray that this lesson has been helpful to you. It certainly has been helpful to me over the years developing it. We need to be intentional about our outreach activities. Elders, we need your buy-in. Evangelism driver, we need your passion. Congregation, we need your enthusiastic involvement. New converts, we need your excitement. I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of those slides that I showed were people that came to Christ because someone had just come to Christ and had led them to Christ almost immediately after becoming a Christian. That's how it works. That's how it worked in the early church. That's how it'll work in the 21st century. Finally, we need to let God do His part. If we do our part, you can be guaranteed He will do His part. Why? Because His desire is for all men to be saved. His plan is for us to share the gospel, and then it's between them and their heart and God working on their heart. Thank you very much for your time. I think that's the last slide, and I'm supposed to make it go. Yep. If anybody has a need tonight, whether it be to be baptized into Christ, understanding that you have sin on your soul and you want to have that sin forgiven, or perhaps you've done that and you've fallen away, perhaps you just need the prayers of this congregation, we'd love to help you with that in any way we can. Won't you come now as together we stand and sing the song of encouragement?